Okay. Well, you know what? Probably on this note, why don't we start our discussion of villains and villainy? As we are in the middle of NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, the next step to take after we have explored our genre, we have explored our setting, we have explored magic systems and monster ecosystems as well. We have set a very firm foundation. We know the playground in which our characters, our actors, our villains, our NPCs, whoever, we know where they're going to be playing. Pardon. And possibly fighting. And maybe even more. With the considerations that this is going to be a grimdark fantasy. And remember that grimdark is conveying societal horror. Not just an individual person's psychological horror, but a societal horror. This is, it is a dystopian. It's a dystopian theme where the individual might be cheerful, might be bright, but man, does it get dark not too far away from that one burning bright person. Where things might feel cloistered or oppressive economically, societal, through like the legal system, through leadership or something, through governance, in many ways. Maybe not even through something internal, but an externality that is imposed on the people of this area. And if you recall, after determining that we are going through a grimdark filter for our genre, or technically subgenre, we developed our desert and mountain terrain, our setting. This is going to be what will contain our dystopia. This is going to be where the conditions of the environment are going to lend themselves to us describing what happens. For example, if we use this illustration from Vesson, what would you describe here? Would the ghosts be absolutely silent? Maybe you only hear the tree in the background creaking in the wind. Or maybe, eerily enough, the ghost suppresses sound, where you should be hearing these natural sounds of the wind, of the bark, of the branches, and yet you don't. Or does this ghost give off some sort of a screech or a howl, or a very somber, maybe even a mournful ooh, sounds of regret? How would you describe the lighting? Now, in this case, we can see the picture. But if you're writing and you don't have an illustration to back it up, what you see here must be described in a way that will give you a complete scene without feeling like a list. Lists can be boorish. Lists do not feel compelling or can remove you from the situation. And as we had talked about magic, a concept of blood magic came up, where there's almost like a blood tax taken from everyone in this dystopia in order to keep the spirits at bay. And so actually, this picture, this was kind of an accidental one to keep up, but it works really well. This could very much be a scene in our grimdark story. Because we know that there are spirits, we know that there's this mountain with a mysterious property. We can imagine the ecology, because we had that conversation, of the monsters. What do they feed off of? What are their goals? Are there giant spiders in our setting? Just because it's fantasy doesn't mean there has to be. In fact, chat said, well, maybe giant scorpions if they're in the desert. Now, why are we going from this to villains? And why are we starting with villains? And here, within the first, well, I guess technically 6 minutes, it's because the story you write is about the villain. Oh, that was a dramatic part of the music, right? Dun dun dun! What? What do you mean? How is my story about the villain? I thought I was writing a hero and, his or her group of friends that go to save the day. The unlikely wizards at wizard school overthrowing the evil wizard, or even that kind of edgy anti-hero who just wanted to be left alone and ends up on the trail of overthrowing the corrupt government or something. Your villain is the one that provides the reason for the adventure. The story is what is happening in the wake of the villainy. The story might be seen from the perspective of your hero, but the actions are those of the villain. That you're chasing after the villain. You're trying to defeat the villain. You're collecting the MacGuffins to banish the villain back to wherever. Hi, James Norris. Good to see you. And if we begin with our villain, we know exactly what is happening. We know what is going on, where it's going on, and how to describe the ramifications of those events. From the point of view of the hero trying to catch up to the villain. And so, while it's not the only way to write your story, yep, we'll get into that, Delport, absolutely. But it's important to have that set up. And if you want to write about everything from the hero's point of view, you can. I have personally found it so much easier to get everything else prepared to then have your hero wander through the guided tour of the setting, furnished by your villain, by your NPCs, by all of the machinations, the society, the laws of it, the religions, the other people, the inhabitants, the weather. The hero is the focus, and again, our point of view, but there's so much more we need to understand before we get to the face of the story. Who usually, not all the time, but who usually is coming from a position of ignorance. And we learn through our hero, through the protagonist, of what is happening as it's all pieced together. That's part of the fun, part of the mystery, part of the thrill of reading through things and seeing how will they survive in this grimdark environment. So we're continuing. I mean, there is no affiliation, but for those of you who may want to learn more about NaNoWriMo, here it is. A link to at least to the official organization. Whether or not you want to do anything with them, that's up to you. If you just want to sit down and write a story that you've always wanted to put on paper, whether it's a novel or you're planning out like a little 32-page comic or whatever else. I mean, it doesn't have to wait till November, but this is a pretty good reason. A lot of other creative energy is flowing, and people are interested. You might be able to bounce some ideas off of them and get something going, This is the month, the season to plant those seeds. Now, as Delport has pointed out, not all villains are individuals, though. Your villain can be a cultural conflict, an impending natural disaster, etc. It doesn't have to be a BBEG, although that is the most popular. And that is we will touch on that, I promise, Delport. But it was, for simplicity's sake, the easiest thing to reference is the classic hero chasing after the big bad evil guy kind of a thing. James says Batman very much made great by the villains. I'd suggest making sure that their effect is felt in the world. You all, you're 2 steps ahead of me, and that's perfectly fine. It's great for you all to point that out, because as others might have questions, or if you want to bounce ideas off each other, please do so. This workshop is not just supposed to be me talking to you all or lecturing or whatever. This is a conversation, and to bring up things that, if you think I'm missing something, shout it out, please. I will not take offense. In fact, it's good to know that a couple of you out there are ahead. You are making that accommodation for, the tornadoes and Twister being the villain of the story. Or you could say, well, we'll get to it. Anyway, NaNoWriMo, hi everyone. Now, more a little bit on what James had brought up. There are a couple different words for types. Hang on, everyone. I gotta plug my headset in because I just got the beep of I have maybe 5-ish minutes left on my headset. Get over here. Yep, absolutely, Rosewolf. So the first thing that we can explore is we hear terms that might be similar. You hear villain, that may be something of an antagonist. That might be, I don't know. You get a concept of like a red herring. You even hear the word of foil. And let's begin with the concept of a foil, because these are important to consider for our villain, and will also carry forward a little bit into our discussion of NPCs in the next workshop. Not tonight, but in the next one. Let me share the link. A foil character, or character foil, is a character whose actions and traits contrast those of another character, often a protagonist. The foil character is like a white background against a subject in a photograph. It allows the complexities of another character to shine forth, because the reader sees more vividly how one character's actions and decisions represent their personality. Not all stories have foil characters. However, this simple tool from high school English class can still provide powerful juxtaposition to your characters and their personalities. Fiction writers, especially writers of literary fiction, might want to consider employing character foils in their work. So, what is a foil character in literature? Let's examine this character development device more closely with attention towards foil character examples and how to employ a foil in your writing. Pardon. A foil character is someone who contrasts the traits and actions of another character, often the protagonist, the hero, the good guy. By contrasting two different characters, the author seeks to emphasize the strengths, weaknesses, philosophies, and or themes that each character represents. This is the big part. Now, the emphasis here is on contrast, not necessarily on opposition. In other words, a character foil for your protagonist won't always be the antagonist. This might be something similar to a rival. Think in the Pokemon games, you have a rival in every game, right? Your rival isn't necessarily there to defeat you and to beat you and to take your Pokemon or, all the bad guy stuff. But tests you, is a hindrance that you overcome, and also might showcase a different way to live and exist in the world of Pokemon. The antagonist is the person whose actions or needs stand in the way of the protagonist. Sometimes they represent certain opposing ideas compared to the protagonist, and they can also be a foil. Pardon. But they exist to be an opposing force for the protagonist, not necessarily as a force of comparison and contrast. So the emphasis here is on the juxtaposition of two richly developed characters. What does their juxtaposition reveal about each individual's psyche? Take, for example, the characters Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. The two complement each other extraordinarily well, and Watson's own set of traits springboards Sherlock's crime-solving genius. Often, Watson will draw the wrong conclusion about a certain case, or else employ the correct logic while missing certain details. Sherlock then employs his own superhuman imagination and surprising wealth of knowledge to fill in the gaps of Watson's theories. Watson is a perfect foil character for the purpose of solving mysteries. Where Watson approaches a mystery using logic and empathy, Sherlock uses his recondite knowledge, power of observation, and detached emotionality to crack the case. The two make a perfect pair, and while Watson helps highlight Sherlock's genius, he also helps Sherlock arrive at the right solution. The term foil comes from the practice of placing foil behind a gemstone so that the stone looks brighter and more refractive. Now, we often hear what's like, you foiled my plans. Curse you kids and your dog, kind of a thing. You foiled me. Or we have something like an air foil or other foils. In this case, a foil, the antagonist is more the actual getting in the way. A foil can, but really, whether a good guy or a bad guy, to use the simple terms, the foil is there to help the character shine, right? So bear this in mind. If you want to make a foil, which could be an antagonist, ultimately there is going to be that brighter shine. Now, there are some examples here. I'm not going to go over them all. You can read this for yourself with the link that I provided here. But we also, so we have Hamlet and Laertes, Denver and the Beloved, George Milton and Lenny Small of Mice and Men. Does your story need a foil character? Character foils add depth and richness to the people that populate a story, but are they necessary to writing fiction? You'll notice that the foil character examples we included all come from novels. That's because it's rare that you'll find character foils in short stories. Adding a foil to a story involves a certain level of complexity, because now two different characters need to be developed enough that each character contrasts the other. This level of depth and complexity can only be achieved with a higher word count and enough scenes for the reader to observe each character's interactions and psyches. In other words, short story writers don't need to worry too much about this level of character contrast. Additionally, many great novels do not have foil characters, because foiling is just one of many tools in the character developer's toolbox. Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita, for example, does not attempt to give its characters any foils. The novel doesn't need any foils either, since the novel is narrated by its unseemly protagonist, Humbert Humbert. We learn everything we need to know through his unreliable lens. That's another writing term. We can save that for something else. So, compare and contrast, consider intent, create conflict, which is why you can have a foil that could be the villain, the antagonist too. And practice it. Have fun with it. How can you put a foil on the back of the gem that is your hero? So there's one concept that gets a little bit into what James had talked about. Batman very much made great by the villains. Now, we heard the term antagonist. Antagonist versus villain. What's the difference? Oh man, there's all these words. Wait, so a foil isn't a villain, but a villain might not be an antagonist? Writers sometimes use the terms antagonist and villain interchangeably, but if we take a closer look, antagonists and villains serve very different functions in a story. So what exactly is the difference? The short answer is that villain describes a character archetype, while antagonist describes a character's role in the plot of your story. So what is a villain? The villain in your story is the character whose primary motivation is malicious destruction. They're usually the main antagonist of the story, causing the biggest source of conflict for the hero. Some examples of popular villains include Voldemort in Harry Potter, Darth Vader in Star Wars, President Snow in the Hunger Games, and the stepmother in Cinderella. Each of these characters actively enjoys causing harm to the hero. It's important to make your villain strong enough to challenge your protagonist, or better yet, even stronger than them. When the hero appears outmatched, you create page-turning tension for your readers. If you're writing a villain, here are some attributes you should give them. His or her skills match or exceed your protagonist's. He or she believes he or she is doing the right thing. He or she has characteristics that match your protagonists, but they are misguided. There's going to be a summary of this in a little bit, and it'll also touch on what it was that Delport had brought up. In addition to the attributes above, it's also important to make sure your villain stands out from the other villains in literature we've all seen before. Many writers create two-dimensional villains who have no personality traits aside from simply being villainous. The problem with that, of course, is it can lead to a boring story with a cookie-cutter bad guy. If you can, try and give your villain a nuanced personality and an interesting set of motives. A strong and memorable villain needs to be actively evil in a unique way. And so here's a list that you can go through. This is going to, in a way, come up with. Oh, wait a minute. The villain is a character foil for the hero, and the two of them share many similarities. Oh, it's almost like this was supposed to layer on each other. Pure coincidence, I assure you. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Why are you even here listening to me? Can I have multiple villains? Generally, a story has a single villain. It's because the villain is the protagonist's main opponent. Some franchises in the series have multiple villains, but in those situations, only one main villain is featured in each installment or episode. For example, Batman fights the Joker, the Penguin, the Riddler, the Scarecrow, and countless other villains in the Batman comics. Sometimes individual stories have multiple villains, though this is much rarer. And if you go this route, though, you should be careful not to overwhelm your readers. Now, this comes back to, well, then what's an antagonist? Also referred to as an antagonistic force is anything that prevents the protagonist of a story from reaching their goals. Antagonists don't have to be evil. They don't even have to be human. All they have to do is stand in the way of the protagonist's goals. Often, antagonists are other characters who have their own goals and their own obsessions. Unlike the villain, they don't necessarily take pleasure in causing the main character harm. They just happen to have desires that conflict with the protagonist's desires. Many antagonists are compelling characters in their own right, since they're not necessarily bad people. They can even go through character development and grow throughout the course of the story. Sometimes characters that serve as antagonists in one part of the story become allies in another part of the story. That's because their goals might change in a way that helps the protagonist. Some examples of well-known antagonists include the titular White Whale in Moby Dick, Draco Malfoy in Harry Potter, the Stormtroopers in Star Wars, and Katniss's rival contestants in The Hunger Games. Here are some examples of an antagonist's role in the story, and this is where we come down to a natural disaster that gets in the way of the protagonist's plans. In Jurassic Park, that is the Storm, or that's even the T-Rex, you could say. You know, would you say the T-Rex is the villain of the story? If we're using antagonist and villain interchangeably, it's understandable. But if we were to, actually, as we push the glasses up to the bridge of our nose, like so, the T-Rex or the Storm that shuts down the power would be more of an antagonist. If you want to blur the line, maybe. Uh-oh, we're being raided by Gaming Z and a Zero. We make it look easy. Watch out, boys. We're dangerously cheesy. The campaign is over. Hi, good morning, Tony. Oh, so this is Naziro's long-running Legend of Zelda-based 5e game. It's over. Oh my goodness. What a haul. You guys have been playing this game for years now. Oh goodness. Well, if you want to talk about the antagonist, villain, foil, or something else that you had to throw down, you're welcome to do so. So what about, and by the way, the villain can be the antagonist too. What about something like, would you all out there argue that the Xenomorph from the Alien franchise, would you say that the Xenomorph is an antagonist or a villain? Yeah, 5 years. What a haul. So next week you're starting a new one, right? Not long enough. Oh, I know those feels, Overlord Chameleon. I hope you left nothing on that battlefield and you feel amazing for it. Ah, there we go. Yep, Xenomorphs are antagonists. The company is the villain. Because certainly, I mean, you could say, well, the aliens, they abduct people, they kill them, and transform them into more of them, and they do, and there is a thought process to it. But it's kind of like saying that Tyrannosaurus Rex is the villain of Jurassic Park. They're more a force of nature. Now, what if we refine this a little bit more? Here's a question for you all. Is the Terminator in The Terminator an antagonist or a villain? Now, I mean, we could have both also. But if we're talking about, well, T-Rexes and xenomorphs might be more understandable. Would the Terminator, like the T-100, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character, or the equivalent in perhaps some of the other ones, is that an antagonist, a villain, or maybe even both? Dual Blade, welcome to the workshop. Welcome to the Hero Zone. We're having a very fun time here. For the Terminator, I'd say personally the time travel plot is the villain, says Overlord. Well, maybe the Terminator is the case where we actually have an antagonist that is the villain. Because the Terminator is actively trying to interfere with the protagonist's actions. And I would say there is enough thought put into it. Now, you might go, well, and this is where I might have been being tricky. Yeah, but the Terminator is just, a robot executing a program and a directive sent to it by Skynet and all this other stuff. There is a line, right, where when would the T-Rex actually cross from being a simple antagonist into a villain? And it's somewhere between being a Tyrannosaurus Rex and being the Terminator. The villain is almost always an antagonist. In fact, they're usually the main antagonist of the story because they provide the main source of conflict. And by the way, where it goes into there's only one villain concept. You can have more. Think of it this way. It is an episode of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Shredder is on the scene, trying to do something nefarious, and sends Bebop and Rocksteady out to try and defeat the Turtles once and for all again. And you might go, all right, well, Bebop and Rocksteady are bad guys in TMNT, and Shredder is a bad guy. Oh, they're all villains. Maybe in a broad sense. In this moment, for this story, Shredder is the villain. Bebop and Rocksteady are antagonists. Now, how does this play into the types of villains that we might see? Just as with fantasy, and we explored the subgenres of fantasy and how we arrived to grimdark being the one chosen for this NaNoWriMo fantasy project. Let's explore. From Norman Bates to Gollum to Jafar from Disney's Aladdin, great stories are filled with indelible villains. Films, novels, short... Oh, by the way, hang on. I think I should have shared the last one. Yeah, I did. Let's share the reference. Bloop. Challenge the stories here on Drive the Conflict. Drive the conflict, right? Remember, the villain is your story. It's just from the point of view of the hero, more often than not. Many of these villains fit into certain stylistic categories known as archetypes. Delport says, Shredder is the villain if the Turtles are going to defeat Bebop and Rocksteady and challenge Shredder during the story. But if this arc focuses on a specific plot where Shredder is off-screen, isn't he more like a mentor or motivator to the villains, Bebop and Rocksteady? Well, in the scene I described, Delport, it's the three you have a bank being robbed by Shredder. I mean, we'll keep it simple. So you have Shredder, Bebop, and Rocksteady, and the Turtles arrive. In this little scene, in this short story, or whatever, Shredder would be the villain and an antagonist, because Shredder is throwing Bebop and Rocksteady at the Turtles to try and get in their way. So while the Shredder isn't actively fighting the Turtles in this moment, and maybe later after the Turtles, invariably, knock out Bebop and Rocksteady, of the three, Bebop and Rocksteady are not the villains, they are antagonists, with Shredder enjoying wearing both those hats on his pointed helmet. And so the scope of, the scope or the role or the purpose of that character might shift as the point of view does or as the story advances. And there's some examples over here and that we can bring up as well. So there's the anti-villain, and this might go into, James North says, also depends on the game if you're playing as the anti-hero or the villain yourself. The anti-villain is a villain archetype in which the bad guy has a sympathetic motivation or appealing characteristics. In the same way that an anti-hero is ostensibly a good guy with villainous or immoral tendencies, an anti-villain may have justifiable, noble goals or even a good side. Examples of anti-villains include Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs and Draco Malfoy from the Harry Potter series. The Beast, a classic villain whose goal is to terrorize and attempt to defeat the main character. The Beast is a literal monster. This type of villain cannot be reasoned with and is often found in the horror or science fiction genres. The whale from Moby Dick and the shark from Jaws are examples of this type of villain. The Bully. Bullies serve as simple, straightforward opposition to the protagonist. This character archetype is sometimes marked by a backstory that explains their mean and oppressive tendencies, such as a childhood marked by abuse or insecurity. Other times, they are simply mean for the sake of being mean. Examples include Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Fletcher from the film Whiplash. The Machine. The Machine is similar to the Beast with one major difference. It is a technological construct and is therefore lifeless and incapable of pain, fear, and emotion. The Machine can often be found in science fiction thrillers like Ultron in the Avengers Age of Ultron, or Arnold Schwarzenegger's robotic killing machine in The Terminator. Bebop and Rocksteady are comic relief, less serious for pacing and juxtaposition of tone. And in that case too, James, Bebop and Rocksteady might fulfill the role of being a foil. Because you look at them, oh, they're so strong. They're a rhino and a boar. They have muscles everywhere. They're these fierce wild animals. And then you have these humble turtles that are able to shine against these imposing forces. And so in this case, the antagonists, Bebop and Rocksteady, might be antagonists and foils. Or one might simply be an antagonist, and the other might be a foil, depending on their actions and what their role in this story is. The Mastermind. The Mastermind opposes the protagonist by overseeing a brilliant, diabolical master plan. They are a gifted schemer, an evil genius who attempts to defeat the protagonist mentally as opposed to physically. Great villains include the Mastermind tradition include Hans Gruber from Die Hard, a Christmas movie, and Lex Luthor from the Superman series. Evil Incarnate. This villain personifies evil itself, offering little in the way of character development or backstory. This type of evildoer serves as an obstacle to the hero's journey and is primarily found in fantasy and superhero genres. Examples include Sauron from The Lord of the Rings, Darth Vader from Star Wars, and the Joker from The Dark Knight. The Henchman. The Henchman exists to do the dirty work of someone else, usually the Mastermind or another major evil character in the story. They are functionally the sidekick of the main villain. Though they usually lack the villain's brains, they make up for it in brawn. Examples include Boba Fett from Star Wars and the monkeys from The Wizard of Oz. Now, and in this case, it might be Grima Wormtongue, though that's more of the brains over the brawn in that instance. And now we go, wait a minute, so Bebop and Rocksteady might be antagonists, they might be foils, and we could also classify them as henchmen if we really want to get down to the classification. And it's fun, not that you have to overcomplicate your writing and make sure that a status is tracked at every moment. You can, and I'm sure that there is writing software out there. I'm not sponsored by any of them, but there's like World Anvil, there's Campfire, there's other things. You could just use a Word document and do stuff too. There's plenty to help you do that if you want to track the evolution of a character throughout the story. And just as in the natural world, we have our classification system, kings play chess on fine glass stools. Kingdom, phylum, class, kings play chess, order, on family, genome? What was G? I think it might be genome, and then species. Yeah, and Iron Chef, until we finally learn of Palpatine, that's true. Vader swaps out from being the villain. Then we have the Fanatic. The Fanatic's villainy is driven by extreme ideology. Oftentimes they are propelled by religion or a twisted moral belief that gives them fuel to carry out their twisted mission. The serial killer John Doe from the movie Seven is a true villain in the Fanatic tradition. Make sure your villain has a strong connection to your hero. Make them a worthy opponent. Put yourself in your villain's shoes. And by the way, this is even if it's a simple force of nature, like the Twisters in Twister. And consider your villain's motivation, and that's why we want to consider our villain first. Now, before we get to our examples, there's one more thing to bring up, and then we'll have our audio-visual time together, everyone. I'll wheel out the cart, and we can have fun here. This is simply backing up, and maybe even further refining the list that we just went down. Villains bear as much importance as your protagonists. For many stories, the protagonist going against the villain drives the plot forward, and their interactions often define the climax of a story. It's not ill-advised to even write the villain... Wait a minute. What the heck is this thing saying? It's not ill-advised to even write the villain first before the protagonist. They're the ones who will make your protagonist heroic, after all. Well, it's not just me saying it. Oh, heck. Oh, I'm not the crazy one here. Okay. So, I mean... Welcome! If it isn't my dear friends Dork Tales. How you doing? Welcome to the Hero Zone, everyone. Let's give a shout out to Dork Tales. Neocal Sabersloth Council Member Laruk. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Welcome, Meister Hypester. Welcome to the Hero Zone, everyone. we are conducting our annual NaNoWriMo writing workshop series, where together with your all's help, we lay out everything needed to write a story. This year, Chet has decided to go for a grimdark fantasy story, and we are beginning, after establishing the genre, and learning about it and establishing it, we made our setting. We talked about magic systems and how they're employed. And we also talked about monster ecology. That was the setup. Now that we have the setting, the first character we're going to make for our story is the villain. Because remember, the villain is your story. The hero or the heroes are just the ones trying to play catch-up. It's from their point of view. And so, as I did last year and as I'm doing again this year, I strongly recommend, if you're doing this kind of writing, and this can extend to planning a tabletop session, not just writing. There are some differences in how it's presented and composed. Your villain, in my opinion, is the first one to write. Because everything in the story follows, that's the tail of the comet, is the story. But you gotta have that comet there. Provide a believable backstory for your villain. Don't make your villain stupid. Now, there's reasons why you can, or even should. This is advice for generally writing towards a good villain. And get your villain involved with your hero. I'm not going over all this. The link was put up in chat. But everything that we have gone over is backing this up. Now, maybe you agree with this, maybe you would re-tier them, but let's look at the summary of what we have gone over. Of course, with the vagaries of the differences between foils, antagonists, villains, and then the subtypes of villainy, right? The archetypes. What type of villain are they? So, and without needing to hurt anyone's feelings, or I understand there are probably specific instances where a villain could be seen as moving up or down. Let's look, and by the way, these villains that are shit tier villains, pardon my French, everyone. I keep it PG-13, but I think we're allowed to say that in a PG-13 movie. Here, just in case, I'll drop a heck and an F-bomb. Just to show that, you know, we're trying here. Villains who are just evil for lust or for power. Now, in this list is presuming you want a compelling villain, and why the Tyrannosaurus Rex, or the from Jurassic Park, or the Twister from Twister, or the Xenomorphs from Alien they would be here. You know, they are animalistic. They're just a natural force. There's nothing really compelling. It's an obstacle, almost purely there in front of you. So, the alien or the tornado might very well invoke fear or thrills, or, you know, might have you, you know, in your seat, you go, whoo! You know, you clench up so tight, you tear a hole in the back of your britches. But if you want to write, if you say, oh, villain, I'm going to have this compelling villain, you know, I'm going to have people be sympathetic or whatever else, cool. Not all villains even have to be that way. You can have just a force of nature and be perfectly good as long as it's employed the correct way. But anyway, meh tier villains. Villains whose motives are a mystery and seem almost insane at times. Now, in what we read, Hannibal Lecter was demonstrated as a great villain. So why is Hannibal Lecter a meh tier villain? In fact, why is the Joker? Why would you think? Let's just presume that the author of this list is correct. Why do you think Hannibal and or the Joker are listed as a meh tier villain? It can represent an extreme of an aspect of emotion or part of the human condition. Yeah, one-dimensional. You go, all right, well, for the Joker, I definitely don't want to be around this guy. I don't understand what he's doing, and if I'm supposed to come along as a reader or as whatever else on a journey, yeah, the Joker's a force. But I don't really get it, and so I guess I just want to avoid it. I see it as an obstacle, maybe not necessarily as clearly as a xenomorph. But, I mean, just going like, oh, I'm wacky, is that compelling? Tony, I'll go over it, don't worry. Now, a mid-tier villain. Villains who are only obeying their nature and doing what they do to survive. This, you might also find those forces in nature. You know, here we have Lavos from Chrono Trigger. This is where you could also find maybe a xenomorph, maybe a tornado. You know, it's an undeniable thing. Maybe in that case, why that would be mid-tier more, that they're only obeying their nature over the shit tier, is because the villains of the shit tier could be so much more. But all that's happened is that they've been reduced down to nothing more than power hungry equals evil. There's no subtlety. It's just there. They don't even get to be a force of nature because they could be so much more and yet have reduced themselves not to be. Whereas at least, you know, the Tyranids in Warhammer, speaking of grimdark settings, the Tyranids in Warhammer 40,000 would be a mid-tier villain for a story. Now, a high-tier villain. Villains who are retaliating against misdeeds done to them. They may be seeking to change society as a whole. You can see now we're getting a little bit more nuanced, refined. We go from those who are just obeying their nature to those who are retaliating against misdeeds done to them. They're seeking to change society. Which some people might say, okay, I agree, society needs changed. But not like that. Now, what about a great tier villain? Reluctant villains who only do evil things because of the situation they find themselves in. Mr. Freeze. Now, so we have two Batman villains here from his Rogues Gallery. The Joker being listed in the meh tier. But we have Mr. Freeze as a great tier villain. Now, this is probably why I can ask you, what makes Mr. Freeze a great tier villain? Is that because you know more of his backstory? You might actually be sympathetic to... I mean, you might not like what he does. And he's not necessarily evil for the sake of, you know, I'm gonna rob a bank today. Nah. He does things that are purposeful, with purpose, that's both personal or will help advance something still selfish, yes. But the situation he's in was born out of something of a sense of desperation. An act of passion, but one that wasn't just basic nature. Yeah, I do agree, James. I'm sure we could make arguments for different takes on things too. So, like, in a general sense, right? But then we have the Elder God tier. The Elder God tier villain. Villains whose motives are hard to find fault in and arguably better than the heroes. Villains whose motives are hard to find fault in and arguably better than the heroes. If you don't know who this villain is, that's fine. I won't tell you. I'll let you find out. That being said, I personally believe that this is a person who does have elder god tier villainy. This is a villain of a story that does deserve to wear that crown. And from the perspective of the list builder, why that is a more compelling villain. Now, can you still have stories, like fun, compelling, successful stories with a meh tier villain? Of course. How popular is Joker over Mr. Freeze? How popular is the Legend of Zelda series featuring Ganon as a recurring villain, a popular and well-known villain, despite Ganon being shit tier? As long as they're fulfilling the type of role that you need them to do, and it's not something that you're trying to. Well, I know that there's the meme about it. Put the square peg into like a round hole. Remember that, like the lady with the shaped bucket and all that. Anyway, like as long as you're not trying to have some waxing philosophical ooze that's going over the misdeeds done to it in the middle of an adventure when it's an ooze. But just because they encounter an ooze in a dungeon, it could be a force of nature. It can still be thrilling. It could even be a memorable encounter from your book or your role-playing game. But it's not appropriate in all circumstances to have an ooze with a philosophy that somehow undermines the heroic concepts of your hero or your party. Because what happens when they kick in the door and go into the room with, a zombie in it? That zombie in that scene for sure is a villain. Well, it's villainous. Does the zombie now need to also be some great tier where we spend an hour we spend 20 pages of our novel? Like, an hour role-playing through or 20 pages of a novel, like, going into the intimate details of how this zombie had, a wife and kids, and how all this happened, and left a diary that we explore, and we have to read it all so we understand how the zombie plague manifested, and then we get, an itchy tasty moment, and all this other stuff. We don't need it, especially after we just had a waxing poetic gelatinous cube. So think about the role of your villain. Now, let's go back, and we're going to get a couple quick examples. And I want to ask you, and also, hi after Fav. Which kind of villain, whether through an archetype, or are they more of a foil? Are they, are they a villain, antagonistic? How would you describe the type of villain? In fact, and also, hi, Nyan Isgani Anubis. Well, let's just get into it here. Oh, the Joker. Interesting.
Only you can make this world seem right. Only you can make the darkness bright. Only you and you alone can thrill me like you do, and fill my heart with love for only you. that you do. You're my dream come true, my one and only you. Only you can make this change in me, for it's true. You are my destiny. When you hold my hand, I understand the magic that you do. You're my dream come true, my one and only you.
Given the context, it's subjective, James. And I hope I presented it as such. I'm not saying that that's a definitive, like objective set in concrete, but it was out to make a point about a point to consider about villainy. In this instance, in this example, how might you describe the Joker? Now, granted, things like, creepy, for sure. With what it is that he's singing, and we can presume that the context is that the Joker is singing to Batman, as there's often that, a back and forth between the two. Well, the Joker might be an antagonist. Although in this example, if we have nothing else to go off of, the Joker isn't even being an antagonist here. And the Joker isn't being a villain. In a broad sense, yes, we know the Joker to be a villain. But this would be an example of the Joker being a foil to Batman. Although perhaps, in its own interesting way, the Joker sees the Batman as a foil to him. One enhances the other. It shows a dichotomy between the two. They reflect off of each other, enhance each other. And so in this instance, we have the Joker not even being an antagonist nor a villain. Again, in the context of this presentation. But this is a character foil. Ah, okay. Now, what about this here? If any of you haven't played I would highly recommend playing BioShock. If you haven't, and you would like to play it, this is towards the end of the game, and so we're coming to a resolution towards the end of the game. And if you don't want a spoiler of the villainy, then I guess look away, or mute it at least, or something, until I don't know. I'll wave or something. You can cover up until you see me. But anyway, BioShock. Here we go.
The assassin has overcome my final defense, and now he's come to murder me. In the end, what separates a man from a slave? Money? Power? No. A man chooses. A slave obeys. You think you have memories. A farm. A family. An airplane. A crash. And then this place. Was there really a family? Did that airplane crash? Or was it hijacked? Forced down Forced down by something less than a man, something bred to sleepwalk through life until they are activated by a simple phrase spoken by their kindly master. Was a man sent to kill, or a slave? A man chooses. A slave obeys. Come in. Stop, would you kindly? Would you kindly? Powerful phrase. Familiar phrase.
Would you kindly? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
Sit, would you kindly? Stand, would you kindly? Run! Stop! Turn. A man chooses. A slave obeys. Kill! A man chooses. A slave obeys. Obey!
Hurry now! Grab Ryan's genetic key! Now would you kindly put it in that goddamn machine? Variety of aliases. Hell, once I was even in China like for 6 months. You've been a sport, so I guess I owe you a little honesty. The name's Frank Ronte. I gotta say, I had a lot of business partners in my life, but you, boss, the fact that you are genetically conditioned to bark like a cocker spaniel when I said, would you kindly, might have had something to do with it, but still, as soon as that machine finishes processing the genetic key you just fished off Ryan, I'm gonna run rapture tits to toes. You get it, pal? You know what they say. Never mix business with friendship. Thanks for everything, kid. Don't forget to say hi to Ryan for me.
Now, as it was discussed before, throughout the court. By the way, like, the visual is over, but I am going to be talking about the situation that we watched. So technically, the visual and audio spoiler is over, but I'm going to be discussing what it is that we see here and what kind of a villain that we've had. Because when the story opens, the villain seems to be clearly, undoubtedly, Andrew Ryan. As you find proof that Andrew Ryan has made questionable decisions, is throwing obstacles in your path. Antagonist, absolutely. Foil, no. I mean, no more than like, you kind of level up throughout his city. But that's not exactly adding a shine to you, despite you having shiny powers. But a villain, you go, yes. And there we go. That was it. The last stand. We are in Andrew Ryan's office. And this dude's going down. And then we learn that Andrew Ryan while not a good guy, wasn't actually the villain, as there was a force more nefarious, with less scruples, with more questionable ethics, and where Ryan still upheld ideals, at least like societal ideals, personal ones that would still see the city continue and grow and thrive. Frank Fontaine becomes, well, he is that mastermind style that we talked about through our archetypes, right? But ultimately, through this pursuit, he becomes more of that monolithic, that beast. And so we have a very compelling sense of scale of villainy as one springboards off the other. And we learn who the true villain is, which could even compel us, though we would be, I guess, in a villainous sense, a bit of that mid-tier. As we learn, it is our nature that has compelled us to do some pretty bad things, though we were manipulated through it, or for it, by it, with it, whatever. Now, which kind of villain do we see here?
Yürüye kirse. Yuna Ranakaya. Yürüye negeşt.
I won't waste your time or Catherine's time barking.
Ah, another villain that has been brought up a few times as well, huh? How would you describe Ra from Stargate? Now, if you wanna place Ra on this scale, and this is subjective, or you want to use other terms that we've gone over, how would you describe the villain of Ra? It is clear that Ra is a villain, is the villain of Stargate, and perhaps is a memorable and compelling one. Heck, the Stargate movies spawned TV shows and even a recently created role-playing game system. Tyrannical? Would we have... Is this more of the evil incarnate? The villain personifies evil itself, offering little in the way of character development or backstory. This type of evildoer serves as an obstacle to the hero's journey? Or maybe a mastermind? I mean, going off the scene or what you know broadly of the movie, that either is fine there. Probably not an anti-villain. A classic villain whose goal is to terrorize and attempt to defeat the main character. The Beast is a literal monster. Cannot be reasoned with and is often found in the horror science fiction genres. Ra might be a beast. Despite being able to speak and having technology and commanding vast swaths of people. So while you're considering that, let me offer a similar scene or concept, but get your take on the villain and if they are actually very close or if they're very far apart in their villainy. That's true in the broader sense, James. That's true.
I was a child when you took me.
I saved you.
We were happy on my home planet.
You went to bed hungry, scrounging for scraps. Your planet was on the brink of collapse. I'm the one who stopped that.
Because you murdered half the planet.
A small price to pay for salvation. You know what's happened since then? The children born have known nothing but full bellies and clear skies. It's a paradigm. Little one, it's a simple calculus. This universe is finite, its resources finite. If life is left unchecked, life will cease to exist. I'm the only one who knows that. At least I'm the only one with the will to act on it. Where do you think he brought you?
Your home?
It was. Titan was like most planets. Too many mouths, not enough to go around. And when we faced extinction, I offered a solution. They called me a madman. And what I predicted came to pass. With all 6 stones, I could simply snap my fingers. They would all cease to exist. I call that mercy. The hardest choices require the strongest wills.
And then what?
I finally rest and watch the sunrise on a grateful universe.
I was a child when you took.
Another science fiction, another villain, one who does seek to destroy people, one who is the villain of the story, Ra and Thanos, who command legions and societies, vast technology. Is there a difference between, and they're villains. They are both villains. Is one a more compelling villain? Whether or not that makes them a better villain, I mean, that's subjective. Oh, hi, Nina. How have you been? You want to be a villain in a campaign? What would your type of villainy be? Ra's self-serving nature is better. Yeah, Ra. So Ra is understanding his position and his potential, and perhaps so too is Thanos. But Thanos is at least saying, yeah. So he has diluted himself by thinking that he's doing something good for many people, that he is benevolent. He's the hero, and the other people are the antagonists standing in his way. And I would agree that Ra is a much more monolithic presence, a much more monolithic force. Maybe that pure evil that we had looked into as far as archetypes. I don't think that Thanos would qualify as that elemental evil, right? He sees himself as doing something good. He has purpose and reason. He has plotted it out. Though he does fail to understand, there is an adage that it goes something along the lines of, if you meet one a-hole a day, they are probably an a-hole. If you meet 10 a-holes every day, you are probably the a-hole. And in this case, this is Thanos not realizing that he is in fact the a-hole. Because everyone, sorry, it's a Canadian term, EH hole. Because everyone's against him. Everyone's plotting. The universe is very much against him and needs him. But he does not see. He is powerful, and he knows he's powerful, and he wants to use it to try and be benevolent. But if he can't explain it, if he can't teach it, and it must be forced on people, then, well. Corduroy, good to see you again. You beat the system by not meeting new people ever. And also, hi, Dark Wolf. What kind of villain? I'd probably start off as a bully, obtain ultimate power, and use might makes right mentality. There, y'all heard it here first. So, join Nina's tyranny. Do it now. Get the early bird special before it becomes lethally punitive, and not just 10 years gulag. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this this conversation and exploration of evil. However, I am severely depleted when it comes to refreshment, so I need to get up and refresh myself. And when we come back, with your all's help, for those of you who stick around, I would like your help to make the villain of our grimdark fantasy story here in our workshop. And we'll incorporate the villain into the setting, and we'll talk about the goals and everything else. So hold on tight, and I'll be back in just a little bit. Okay, everyone?